there, gang. Let's dive into something a little more modern. In the last year or two, we've worked on some vintage Hagstroms, some Vikings. This is a newish Hagstrom. This is a Phantomen, which is Swedish for phantom, and it's inspired and developed in conjunction with Ghost, the theatrical metal band, not the spectral apparitions that appear screaming in my room every night at 3:04 a.m. because of something that transpired in 1974. Ghost is popular. They're from Sweden. It's a natural partnership. The Hagstrom of today is a revitalization of that original brand, which died in the 80s, when Asian imports took over their price point in the guitarosphere. They started up again in 2004, and I mean, you like to see that, right? You know, some of the models, I believe, are still made in Sweden. I think it's amazing that we have these regional guitar companies in various places around the world doing their thing, adding spice to the musical stew. However, they also produce a lot of guitars in other places. This one is made in Indonesia. This was purchased as part of a trade from a local online marketplace by a fellow who likes these guitars. He got it home and he realized that the neck was severely bowed. He contacted the seller, who I believe had mentioned that the truss rod was functional and had been recently adjusted. The truss rod may not be functional. So I'm going to see what I can do. The initial idea, ambitious as it was to remove the fretboard and install a new truss rod and maybe some carbon fiber reinforcement strips. You guys saw that in a Hensel video a couple of weeks ago, the procedure. However, in the interim, I did some digging because something in the back of my mind said, oh, wait, wasn't there a thing about Hagstroms? And yes, there is a thing about Hagstroms. It's called the H-expander truss rod, trademark symbol. It's not really just a rod. It's a convoluted alloy extrusion that is around a truss rod, and it's installed when the neck is in pieces before lamination. You know, they have to cut a rather complex dado in there, and that thing's not coming out. No, not without destroying the neck. It's been around for a long time, and the advertised benefit is that it cuts down on the potential for twist, because the wood of the neck could theoretically revolve around a circular section truss rod, where it's unlikely to do so with this H-shaped thing. It also, because of its mass, allows them to get away with a very slender neck profile, which is something that Hagstrom has always been known for. I did some reading about this truss rod online, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I gather the design has changed somewhat over the years, but also on Hagstrom's own site, the adjustment instructions, if you read them, suggest this doesn't work on the lefty-loosey, righty-tighty convention. It's backwards in the text there. Did they use a left-handed thread on this rod? Well, maybe not, because the owner has both tightened and loosened, and I tried to tighten. He'd pushed it to the point where it was not ever going to tighten any farther, and then completely remove the nut, and we still end up with this condition. It's not moving. Just how bowed is this neck? Well, we'd like to assume that it started life off flat and dressed true at the factory. And if that's the case, it has moved into more than 19 thousandths of an inch forward bow. And this is not your normal relief measurement. This is no strings on it at all. There's no tension on this neck, which in my experience is practically impossible, especially in a guitar that's only 4 years old. You'd have to assume that either they used a really bad piece of wood for the neck with a great big knot in it or something, or more likely in this case, I think there might be damage of some kind to that extrusion in there. That makes more sense. Like if this thing was sitting down, maybe a toddler stepped on it and basically bent that metal. Or I suppose it's possible that even in the case, it could have taken a drop. You know, if the case was held upright and fell forward, there's enough inertia to maybe bend that neck. Maybe. I also sent an inquiry to the Hagstrom customer service department asking about the size of nut required, as the owner dispensed with the original as it was really stripped out. They told me it was an M3 or M4, depending on where it was made, and that was fine. And almost as an afterthought, they said, oh, and remember, there's a ball bearing behind the nut. And looking at it, it's true. This is a terribly foreshortened image. It's quite a depth in there. But yeah, why? I don't get it. Long ago, I spent some time working for a bearing company running machines. I don't understand this. Is it to reduce the friction? But really, pressing against the inner or the outer race of a ball bearing with lateral force seems like it's asking for trouble. And removing it, it's really a press fit in the hole. Did the inner race maybe collapse inward past the end of the threads, causing the bottoming thing? It all feels like trying to disconnect the hose to an external oil separator on a BMW. It all fits together so elegantly until you have to take it apart. Now I'm going to have to move this neck a lot. I'm going to have to clamp it into a reverse bow at least equal to the forward one it's got now, and probably more, trying to correct it. It might surprise people just how flexible a neck like this can be, even with that honkin' big piece of metal in it. So I'm going to heat this thing up, push it back, and see how far I can make it go and if it'll stay that way. Fret height in these is probably around 50 thousandths, which it is. They're just kind of standard jumbo frets. One other thing that might be contributing to the flexibility issue is this does not have an ebony fretboard. It looks like it, but this is Richlite or Rocklight, which is a composite material. It's been used by guitar manufacturers for the last 20 years or so as a substitute for ebony, which is getting scarce, and getting ebony in really good quality is even scarcer at this point. So this is not as inflexible as ebony. Ebony is quite dense and quite rigid. This is good stuff, but again, pairing this with a neck this thin, who knows? That might be part of the equation. The owner wanted me to change the board out for an ebony one during the whole process where we were going to pull this off and put a new truss rod in. To be honest, if this doesn't work, the heat bending thing, that would not really make sense. I wouldn't feel good about charging him what it would cost to do that and end up with a guitar that had a seriously bowed neck. Okay, I've shown this thing several times before. This is my neck heating rig. This is a heavy walled aluminum hollow tube. It's kind of rectangular in section. And it has some thermal resistance heaters applied inside with some high temperature glue. And that's all controlled using this power supply. These heaters run at 24 volts. And the unit gets up to about 170 degrees Fahrenheit, which would be around, 60 degrees Celsius. And I let it warm up for a time before cranking on this clamp, which is positioned in the center of the neck. And what this does is a number of things. Like it softens the glue, hopefully, in the fretboard, makes it slightly more pliable, so that when I push it backwards and the unit is turned off, it'll cool and hopefully set in that orientation. But it also may in fact heat the wood to the point where it becomes slightly elastic too, and just like heat bending sides in an acoustic guitar. So I'm going to let this warm up and then crank on this and push this into a fairly serious back bow. Well, as that neck is hopefully adjusting to a new life on the straight and narrow and giving up its crooked ways, let's play around with this Art and Lutherie. Art and Lutherie is one of the subsidiary brands of Godin, or Godin, if you're from Saguenay, or Gatineau. One of many under that corporate umbrella. It's an affordable Canadian-made guitar. Solid wood. This one's made of cherry. We're going to do something a little different with this guy. We're going to set it up for use in Nashville tuning. Them Nashville cats been playing since they's babies and get work before they're two. What's Nashville tuning, you might say? Well, it's like getting a pack of strings for a 12-string guitar and then throwing away the bass ones and only using the octave strings. The lower strings end up one octave higher than normal, and the E and the B stay the same at the top end. Why, you might say? Well, it's an interesting sound. It's clean, it's distinctive, it's very jangly, and for recording purposes it occupies a distinctive, special place in the mix. It sits well with other guitars. It was pioneered by a session guitarist named Ray Edenton in the early 1960s. Ray, whose second name was Quarles, with a QU. He played on a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. He's on Webb Pierce's There Stands the Glass. It's my first one today. Everly Brothers, Bye Bye Love, Wake Up Little Susie, Roger Miller's King of the Road. All pretty fantastic rhythm parts. Now here's my frustration. I want to know what the first recorded use of this tuning was, or other famous cuts from that period. I'm in a vintage country mood these days. There are plenty of sites and AI-generated BS enshrining that information I just gave you. But you can scroll forever on the search, what was the earliest use of Nashville tuning, and not come up with any actual info. Furthermore, even though there's a huge number of sources mentioning those Everly Brothers, Roger Miller, Webb Pierce stuff, Ray Edenton doesn't appear on the personnel lists for any of those tracks or those sessions. If he's there, they turned off his mic because I can't hear him. So who knows? Is it misinformation or disinformation? What a time we're living in. I can tell you that the Rolling Stones used it quite a bit. Alex Lifeson used it on Rush's Closer to the Heart. Johnny Marr played around with it on several Smiths tunes. Dust in the Wind by Kansas. And the intro to Hey You from Pink Floyd is a great example. I can't find actual Nashville recorded titles listed from that early period of its inception that were actually recorded in Nashville. So when you play around with radically different stringing on your flat top guitar, you may find that your saddle was not positioned for that purpose, and you can end up with some serious intonation problems. There's actually quite a lot of saddle left in this guitar, and hopefully we'll get lucky. I'll just flatten off the top here and we can just reuse it. The other thing is the action on this is, because we've increased the string tension quite a bit, fairly high. It's 7/64ths, which is really unnecessary when you have all of these skinny little strings. The other thing that makes this doubly unusual is this player has doubled the octave. The E at the bottom here is the same diameter as the high E. So he's got that going on, which is a little different from normal Nashville tuning, but we'll make it work. The nut slots here seem to have been adjusted slightly, but there's still a few of them that are a little taller than they need to be. The neck in this guitar is exceptionally straight. There's no relief in it. It's not buzzing at all, but it might when we've brought the action down to more reasonable levels, so we might have to adjust the truss rod as well. This B string is particularly high, and I check that by pressing down the string between the second and third frets and eyeballing the gap between the underside of the string and the top of the first fret. If I see a gap that's the same diameter of the string, I know there's way too much room there. This would just be a tiny little gap. You can measure it with feeler gauges as well, but this is a quick and easy way to sort of track your progress. So I'm going to take that down slightly. I've seen people filing nut slots recently straight across. That's going to do bad things. You want there to be sort of a gradual curve up to the front edge of the nut. So the string is taking off at a single point at the front, but it's supported before it gets to that point. So, it should kind of mirror the same angle as the headstock. If it's flat, you'll end up with a weird, dull, kind of sitar-like effect. Same thing that happens if you've got a flat spot on a saddle. The radius on this fretboard is 16 inches. The saddle seems a little bit tighter than that, maybe. It's a little bit loose in the slot too, so we're going to thicken it up slightly before we reinstall it. Let's start off by reducing the saddle height by about a 1/16 of an inch, which is quite a lot, but that's going to reduce the action height by a 32nd of an inch, or 2/64, bringing us down to starting off around 5/64, which should be pretty good. That's going to take away all of the compensation stuff on the top here. Just going to put a little line of CA glue on the back side of the nut, on the area that's going to be under the surface of the bridge. Doesn't take much. Let that cure, and that should be a bit stiffer in the slot. There we go. Nice and snug. Getting intonation points, I've shown this a lot. This is adapted from a technique I learned from David Freeman at Timeless Instruments. It's just a bent guitar string. I use like an unwound G or something similar, a heavy unwound string. If you're going to do this, one trick is to sand the top surface when you're establishing the radius with a heavy grit sandpaper, 80 grit or coarser. If it's too smooth, the string will want to slide forward as you tune up, which can still be an issue depending on how much downward pressure there is on it. And yes, you could also try and devise a device not unlike the one that StewMax sells called the Intonator. That one is designed for plotting the saddle position, for routing the slot. It's not really for use on the top of a saddle. It's not thin enough. And yes, you could also try and design one for this purpose too, but if you do, you'll quickly realize just how complicated it gets trying to have something you can adapt to various string spacings, like 2 1/8 to 2 5/16. I mean, there's overlap there where one device doesn't really want to do all of the settings. This top E is pretty much right in the center of the saddle. And I know this B is going to be all the way back as far as it can go. Now with these all mapped out, I can file to the lines. I'm going to ever so slightly loosen the truss rod here, about like a 1/12 of a turn. It's kind of cool. P90 in use as a sound hole pickup. D'Addario actually makes a Nashville set. We're going to substitute a plain 10 for that low wound 26, obviously. Everything intonates right on the button. Okay, we're all set up. It's much easier to play now with the lower action. The tuning is fun to deal with, not too difficult. This would be an example of a reentrant tuning, which is a very old concept. Lutes, theorbos, Baroque guitars all had reentrant. That means the tones are not ordered in a strict sequence from low to high. So you end up with low, high, and then drops down again. And in this case, we've got 2 of those jumps. So, but again, the notes are all there where you would expect them to be. It gets a little funny once you reach that G string, though. It throws a bit of a wild card into the mix. But it sure sounds interesting, and it's fun to play. Yeah, spent 2.5 days clamped up. I'm going to take this off and we'll see what happens. Well, no substantial change. Still 19 thousandths of relief. It came back 1/1000th of an inch. So, I mean, like, this isn't the wood that's doing this. It has to be the metal. For interest's sake, I'm just going to measure how deep that is in the recess before it hits the front side of the bearing. So, yeah, if I wanted to access that bearing in the joint with the rod itself, I'd have to pull this inlay and then get in there with a Dremel and excavate and eventually end up using chisels and such trying to get to that bearing, because there's really no way that's coming out. I've tried with a couple of thin tools, but I can't access it. The other thing is, I think the bearing probably fits the shaft pretty tightly, and like there's no wiggle room. You got to be able to joggle these things back and forth, and it's not going to happen. So what I'm going to do, I think, is put a little spacer on the threads there, just to make sure there's no chance of the nut bottoming out. Clamp this thing into straightness and really reef down on it and see what happens. So for the spacer, I'm actually going to use another ball bearing because it happens to be the right size and thickness. This one, rather than one that's on there, has got a 5mm interior diameter rather than the 4 of the rod, so that there's some chance of me getting it on cleanly and even taking it off if necessary. 8mm exterior diameter, and see what happens, I guess. Just getting this thing onto the rod is not that easy because the end of the rod is here. I've got all of this space, so I guess I'll thread this on. Okay, that's threaded on. Now I'll see if I can get the truss rod nut in place. Tightening the rod by hand brought me much closer to the goal, about 6 to 7 thousandths relief. So now I'm back in the clamp here. I'm going to use this cold just to provide more pressure, and sometimes this can help. It's a trick Dan Earlywine used to use, or was a proponent of. See if we can get a little bit more. Okay, not dead straight, but it should be workable. It's around 3 thousandths. That was on the surface of the board. The fret tops are a different story. This is going to be drop tuned to D standard. So customer wants 10 to 52s. Yeah, this neck is an overcooked piece of spaghetti. We're looking at like 21 thousandths relief. Now under string tension. That's on the fret tops. On the board itself, well, it's got to be close to the same. Like I'm seeing a huge chunk of daylight. Yeah, 21 thousandths relief. Witness as I physically bend the Allen key. That's not going anywhere, it's actually rebounding. Well, this thing has been sitting around at full tension here for a few hours, and the relief on this neck is 35 thousandths of an inch, just under 0.9 millimeters. And that is the death knell for this guitar. Well, it doesn't happen very often around here, maybe one video a year, but this is one that's not getting fixed. There has to be a logical stopping place, and now all the reasonable methods have been attempted. The action is almost 6/64ths at the 12th fret, which is like 2.3 millimeters. It's even higher, though, in the center of the board down here. And I can't dress that much relief out of the frets. You know, the ones on the ends would be reduced in height by 25 thousandths of an inch or more, like 0.6 millimeters, leaving just over half a millimeter in fret height, 20 thousandths. No one wants to play on that. And doing it would effectively raise the action, because the bridge is already on the deck. So that's it. Why not order a replacement neck from Hagstrom? That's not a thing that happens in real life. Well, you could make one, right, that's $1,000 worth of labor. So no, we wave goodbye. You can still use it to play long, slow, slightly out of tune power chords.